Hey everyone, it's Summer with AstariaSen, and today we are doing another Witchy Wisdoms Wednesdays with me and 6 other fabulous ladies, which at the end of this video, you will find a little box to click through to the Witchy Wisdoms Wednesdays playlist and see everything we have done. Today's topic is divination, and I am going to be showing you all of my Fairy Tarot and Oracle cards. And right here is how high they are stacked on my table. So if you have not subscribed, please do so now. If you are coming back, thanks so much for joining me again. And let's get started. All right, so I have a lot of Fairy Tarot decks and Fairy Oracle decks, and then I have decks I consider Fairy, and I have decks that I consider Fey. Now, Fey is my umbrella term. I consider that the umbrella term for mythical creatures, anything that falls under that Fey category, which would be, you know, the mythical creatures, the fantasy creatures, those kinds of things. So, first we will talk about the Fairy decks that I have, and I have a lot. This is a lot of decks, guys. This is a freaking lot of decks. It is actually 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22 actual fairy decks. And then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 Fey decks. I don't have a problem. There's no problem here. Alright, so we're going to talk about my first one. My first one is in this pretty case that my friend Amber has made me. And it's beautiful. I love this case. And she even put a little fairy on it for me. Isn't that sweet? Okay, so the first one that I'm going to talk about, which if you guys have watched any of my tarot readings, you know that this is one of my decks that I use. And it is the Crystal Visions Tarot, which is a very beautiful deck. And it's got a lot of fairies in it. Like most of this, the reason why I consider it fairy is because it has more fairies than anything else in it. So I consider it a fairy deck. It also has a lot of fairy energy in it, which I super like. Now, what did I base my fairy decks off of? The criteria for fairy wings, honestly. And I know that not all fairies have wings, and there are fairy energies, but to do basic without getting into hundreds and hundreds of details that I go through for my fairy bases, to make it simple, I just decided wings or not wings kind of thing. And maybe that's not how everybody would do that, and that's okay. This is, you know, this is the way I would do it. So if it has fairies in it, but it wasn't mainly a fairy deck, then it went into the Fey pile, okay? So this deck has a lot of Fey energy, fairies, stuff like that, and it's one of my favorites. It's a very sweet deck. It's got a lot of love, and I've shown this several times. So this is the Crystal Visions Tarot, and I have a lot of decks, so I'm not going to go through every single one of them like in detail with you. Some I might just show you the box, and that's about it. For example, I have the Doreen Virtue Fairy, the Fairy Tarot cards here. This is not one of my favorite decks, but I do like the fairies that are on it, and I like some of the messages that are in it. So when I need something just a little bit different, or maybe I have a client who needs something a little bit softer, something a little bit more down to earth, I will pull this one. And I know that doesn't seem like it would be that way, but these cards are more like a modern traditional fairy style, which puts people a little more at ease. So that's why I would pull from this deck. Okay, I gotta move these around. Like, I gotta find a place to put them while I'm going through them. All right. Okay, here's another one. It's the Arthur Rackham Fairy Oracle. And I have walkthroughs on a lot of these decks. So I will put my walkthrough playlist down in the description so you can go check out my walkthrough playlist as well. But this is the Fairy Oracle, and it's the art is by Arthur Rackham, but in the description and stuff like that is by Jamie Elford. Now, Arthur Rackham is an older artist, so it wasn't like these fairy cards were made for an oracle deck. It was, the art was created, and then someone said, oh, this became public use, so let's go ahead and make an oracle deck out of it, which it does work for. I'm not a big fan of these style of decks, though. Like, it's not my super favorite kind of fairy deck to work with. The next one I have is the Mystical Times Empowerment cards. These guys are very, very fairy. Very, very fairy. They're pretty. I did do a walkthrough on these already, which, again, I've done a walkthrough on most of these decks. I like these cards because they're soft and they're sweet. They're very pretty too, but they're more like a pull it for a daily kind of thing rather than throw it in a reading kind of thing. I would throw them in a reading depending on the kind of reading as well, but for what I have found so far, these are the kind of oracle cards that you might pull for like a daily inspiration or a daily message or something you might want to sit on the altar to remind yourself about, you know, affirmations, those kind of things. It is not an affirmation deck necessarily, though. All right, up next I have, this one is the Fairy Guidance Oracle by Paulina Cassidy. This is a very fairy oracle. I have done a walkthrough of this one as well. I think it's one of my older walkthroughs, so sorry about the quality of it, but it is a very pretty deck. Again, it's really good for daily inspiration, but I have used this one in actual 5-card spreads and just pulled them at an end of a 5-card spread for like an overall meaning, which has worked really, really well for me. I like Paulina Cassidy, but not all of her decks are fairy to me. They are very fey. They are very fey. All right, up next is, okay, the Fairy Lights Tarot. This is one of my older ones. I've had it for a while. It is a hard deck to read with, honestly. The Fairy Lights Tarot has a sister deck as well, so I will talk about that in just a moment. So, important about the Fairy Lights Tarot, hard deck to read with because it runs in pairs. So the Fairy Lights Tarot, basically the artist created a big picture, okay? And then for the tarot deck, she cut that picture in half, basically. One card is one half of the picture. A different card is another half of the picture. And it may not be Ace of Cups and Two of Cups go together. It doesn't really work that way. It's more like the Knave of Pentacles will go with the Ace of Swords, or the Fool will go with the Ten of Pentacles. So it has specific meanings to it. It's a little bit harder to learn. It is not a deck I would recommend generally for beginners. I do have a walkthrough kind of on it. I did like a reading with it walkthrough. It's one of my early walkthroughs, so it doesn't have the broad range, I don't think, as a lot of my newer videos do. It's more like the up and down style. So it's a learning process for me, but if you're brave and you want to watch that, feel free to do so. But this is a very fairy deck. Now it has a sister deck by the same artist. And that deck is called Tarot of the Secret Forest. This one I'm not as big of a fan of. I would prefer to use the Fairy Lights Tarot. Most people prefer to use the Secret Forest Tarot. Now the Secret Forest Tarot, the kicker with this one, because I think the artist really likes those kind of kickers, right? So the cool thing about this deck is that it has the color version on one side and then the black and white version on the other. And they're not exactly the same, which you can see. See if I can, there it goes. Okay, so you get two kind of like different meanings depending on which side you're using, which I think can be really, really interesting for tarot reading if you're going to use fairy energy, fairies have that energy that is the double-sided, you know, and they're kind of very specific to things they want to do. And so I think that the Secret Garden one is very fairy as well. Not just with pictures, but with the energy that comes off the cards for me. Again, I don't read with that one. It's a lot harder for me to read with. The Fairy Lights Tarot, I prefer to read with. So the next one is the Mystic. Oh, where did the box go? I don't know where the box went, but it's the Mystic Fairy Tarot. And this one is a beautiful deck. It's got golds on it. It's like it's almost kind of Victorian-ish, but not at the same time. This deck is really pretty. It's kind of more a in-your-face reading deck, though. This one I use when in reference to like work or financial or professional kind of related stuff. You can use this with relationships as well, but my preference is to use it with the more non-relationship related questions. If I feel really called to use it with a relationship, you can, but this deck right here feels more non-love relationship, like romance. Family, it would be really good for family relationships. Each suit in this deck has its own story. The author created its own story for each suit, which is really neat. And it is all about relationships with a friend or with like, you know, a lover, and with family, and with other creatures and stuff like that. But the energy that comes off of it, even though it has a suit that works well, you know, if you're in a love relationship, it just doesn't come off to me as a real good love relationship deck. So I wouldn't use this one specifically for love relationship unless it called to me to do so. Mainly I use it for everything else. But I do really like the energy of it. It's really easy to read with. It's really fun to read too. I would suggest using the book for a little while because some of the meanings are a little bit different, and you get the story that goes with the whole suit as well, which is really neat. All right, next up is going to be the Fey Tarot, and I haven't done a lot of readings with this one. It's one of my newer decks. I just did a walkthrough of this deck not too long ago. These are the backs of the cards, and let me see if I can show you, okay? The artwork is very interesting in this deck. There's some playful art, there's some unique art, and it still follows traditional meanings. I like the kind of more playful side of this deck, but I haven't really used it for any readings yet. So I don't really know how I plan to use it, but once I start using it for readings, I'll have a pretty good idea of how I want to use it. Just right now, it hasn't come up, you know, with everybody staying indoors and not a lot of readings going on. In my world, it's been hard to use my newer decks and figure out what I want to use them for. But the Fey Tarot is one. I will put as many, at least, titles of my Fey decks down in the description. I will try to get to the links if I can, but it's been one of those weeks and one of those days. I'm getting ready to go on a trip and everything, so it's really hard to do all of it. So the next one that I have is the Fairy Blessing cards. They are an oracle deck. These are oracle. They're very pretty. There's not a lot of them. I recommend the book because all it gives you is this. It's more like an oracle, like a blessing, like you would bless the reading or bless the person or bless the client, bless the day kind of thing. This is really good for people who are facing really, really hard times because the fairy blessings that it gives is very uplifting, very encouraging, very we're here to help you kind of thing, which for some people is really what they need to hear when you're in the middle of a reading, that they have help, that they have options available to them, and they want to know things are going to be okay. So the next deck, oh my goodness, I have so many decks. So I have two of the Amy Brown Faery Wisdom decks. I have the original and I have the new one. So the original one is a little bit different, okay? I'll just show you the backs. Here's the original backs to the Faery Wisdom Tarot for the one back, I think, in 2012, okay? And they have kind of the same cards in it as well. So it would depend. I would recommend that you get the one that you like the artwork in most, because the meanings are pretty much the same. The artwork is just updated, and these are the backs. So I would go, if you wanted, I would go through these two decks, the Fairy Wisdom deck and Fairy Wisdom Oracle decks, because there's two of them, both by Amy Brown, and pick the one that you like the most. I don't know if she will put the older version out of print or not. Can't tell you. Then I have Emily Carding's Tarot of the Sidhe. This deck I have not used very much. I know that it's the Sidhe energy more than exactly fairy, as in I like to look at energy, which is more like the Tuatha de Danann. So keep that in mind when you're going for fairy decks, that the Tuatha de Danann are also part of that. And I'm probably butchering how you say that, so sorry if I am doing the best I can here and trying to get through it all. But I haven't really used this deck. I did do a walkthrough of it, and I know people who do use this deck and really enjoy it. But for now, I haven't gotten to it, so I will eventually. It's just it hasn't happened yet. I have a lot of fairy decks, and I have a lot of fairy energy that I'm playing with currently. I have another fairy oracle. And if you are collecting fairy decks, or you like fairy decks, you probably already know this is the Brian Froud Fairies Oracle. And his artwork is phenomenal with this deck. The book is really good that goes with this deck. I have two versions of this deck. One of them is for my personal use. Nobody else gets to use those cards. It goes on my altar. I'll pull them for myself only. And then I have the second version that I use for clients. And they do both, even though I have two versions of them, seriously have two different energies about them. It's crazy. All right, next up is Fairy Tarot. Okay, I know a lot of them have the exact same name, kind of, right? This is a very playful deck. This deck is so playful and so kind of mischievous, okay? These guys are kind of ornery, and they're not necessarily cards that like being read with other cards, I've found. So they're fun. They're fun to use. They're fun to work with. You can see that they can go either direction. I do believe I did a walkthrough on this deck as well. If not, I will get to the walkthrough. But this one's a playful deck. It does well reading with other people. But I don't really use like my oracle cards with this deck. They don't really like to play with the other decks in a good way. Usually the readings come out awkward or off in some way if I try to add like an oracle deck with them. I don't even know why. I can't even explain why. The next one I have is actually the Victorian Fairy deck. It's the Victorian Fairy, but I have it in Russian. It is not in English, and the Russian version is much cheaper than the English version, but it's the English version is like a $200 deck. So this one was not a $200 deck. It's just one that I just really like the artwork in, and that's where the fairy collector in me comes in. So I got this to collect the images, not necessarily to use the deck. And I know that some people don't agree with that or don't want to do that, which is fine. You do you, right? But this deck right here is inspirational in the art for me. I don't just use tarot decks for tarot readings. I use them for inspiration for my creative work as well, because I'm an artist. So I enjoy having that creative energy around me. So yes, I do have it, the Victorian Fairy, but it's not the English version. So next up is another oracle. It's the Wild Wisdom Fairy Oracle, which most of you are familiar with. I, however, have butchered this deck. It was my very first time trying to use the I don't know, you modify it. And it's the very first one I modified. I have these two things on here because I messed up and I have to fix them. And I'm using those as ways to fix them, but they are very uneven. They're not cut right. And it's very bothersome to even use them. So until they're fixed, I can't even use this deck. Bad me, right? Bad me. Okay. Then I have the only Lenormand deck I own is the Fairy Lenormand deck. Again, as a collecting thing, I don't know if I'll ever read Lenormand, but I like the images in the deck. Some of them are a little cheesy, but in general, I find being able to look at fairy art very inspiring. So I have it as another inspirational deck for myself. Then I have the Chrysalis Tarot. Now, originally I was going to put this under Fey, but it's just very fairy. The Chrysalis Tarot has more of a Thoth than an RWS reading style to it. But it is very fairy. Lots of fairy energy in it. Lots of fairy stuff going on in the Fey world, in the fairy realms. So it's very fairy to me. I do like this for creative readings. If you have somebody who is stuck creatively or is just having trouble getting started with their creative stuff or hobbies, or they just feel really drained, this might be a deck that would inspire a client or yourself. Then I have the Shadowscapes Tarot, and most people know this is one of my all-time favorite decks. And this is a tarot wrap that Rochelle over Amethyst Ascension made me, which I always use with my Shadowscapes. So Shadowscapes is a fairy deck. There's lots of fairies in it. Lots of also just Fey energy in general. It's a very pretty deck. It's a little bit hard to read for me sometimes because the artwork is so condensed. There's so much going on in the art that I really have to concentrate to pay attention to what it's saying. But it is my favorite deck, and yes, I count it as fairy, not just Fey. Then I have, let me wrap this back up here. Then I have the Hidden Realms, which most people know as well, and that is another Fey deck. Fairy deck, sorry, not Fey. It would fall under Fey category as well, but it's fairy. So it's a fun deck. Not in the sense that it's going to be as fun as some of like the Paulina decks or something like that. It has a little bit more serious energy about it, a little bit different perspective kind of energy. I would use this for serious readings, not fun and uplifting readings. And there is a difference. You know, there's the clients that come to you and they're like, oh my gosh, my life is falling to hell. I just need to know where to go. The Hidden Realm might work really well for something like that. But it also has an uplifting aspect to it as well because it is fairy, and you can go into this other realm and kind of, there's an escapism about it as well, but it's a more serious deck, not a flitty deck. So I like it as a fairy deck as well. That's the Chrysalis one. Okay, the last one I have that's just fairy is Faery Enchantments. This is by Ian Daniels. It is an indie oracle deck. It's very magic based. It's very magic based. You do magical workings with this deck. I haven't done a lot of magical workings with this deck, but I have done readings on my channel. It is the soul card readings that you will find on my channel. Very gorgeous artwork. The art in this deck is phenomenal. Like, it is so pretty and stunning. I can't even begin to explain, okay? But this is a fairy deck as well, and it goes that each card is the name of like a fairy goddess or god. So that's kind of how that works. Okay, I'm not going to show them all to you again. I have done a walkthrough already on this deck, so I don't need to show you all the cards, and you can find that in my walkthroughs as well. But as far as fairy energy goes, this one's heavy in fairy energy, and if you're looking for somebody who's looking for like spells, or you want to do spells or connection to Fae or something like that, this could very well help you. It's got a lot of information in it. Okay, up next we have just Fae decks. All right, so I'm not going to show all of them to you again. I'm just going to kind of show you the different cards. These have fairies in them, but it's a Fae deck. It's an oracle. This is based off books. So it's definitely a fun deck. I haven't done many readings with it. It's one of those decks that I just haven't gotten around to using reading-wise. Then I have, another indie deck. It's the Primrose and Prose. It's a very pretty deck. I have used these in readings. It's Fey energy, more like Fey shape-shifting energy, but it's a very pretty oracle deck. And it kind of uses like horoscope, like sun signs, like Capricorn, Taurus, moon signs, stuff like that with it. Another Fey deck is the Foxfire deck. Has very, very pretty cards in it. This is one of my favorites. It's an oracle deck. I haven't used this one a lot either, mainly because it's so shiny and the cards kind of stick together, which bothers me quite a bit. But it would be one of those ones that I might pull for daily drawings, or if a client or a friend said, I just need something a little bit different, I might pull and use that deck. Another Fey deck is the Fantastical Creatures Tarot. This is one of those decks that, again, it has a lot of really neat artwork. It has a really good Fey and magical, mystical energy about it. It's really neat to read with, honestly. But again, the artwork is kind of reminds me of the Shadowscapes, where there's so much going on. It takes time to read this deck, but it gives some really good readings. It really does. Whether it's romantic or thought-based, or whatever the client pretty much needs. Another one is the Pixiekins. It's a daily inspirational, and this I put in the Fey, and this is again one of those ones you might pull for daily inspirations, or I would use this even as a overall card, like an ending card for a spread that just gives the client or yourself a little uplift, just a little bit something extra, okay? Then I have Paulina Cassidy's Joie de Vivre, which is a very Fey feeling deck, very fantastical, mythical kind of feedings and readings from it. I have not had, I haven't been able to connect to this deck. I keep trying and trying and trying, but I know many of people who do. It seems like one of those decks that would be really well used for just general readings. Generic general readings. So then I have another Paulina Cassidy deck, which is actually the Paulina deck. I got it secondhand, so it's been pre-cut. I have to get a different deck because they cut all of the words off and around it, and I do not care for it at all. And I don't know which cards are which because it's not very set up for me that way. But it has fairies in it. It has Fey energy in it. It is very pretty, like all of Paulina Cassidy's artwork. It's Fey and very pretty. Then I have two more left. We're almost to the end here. Two more left here. Okay, so the next one is the Greenwich Tarot by Anne Mora. I think that's how you say your name. This is one of my newer decks. Again, fairy in it. I consider it a Fey witch deck. Okay, I'm not going to show you because I haven't even done anything with this deck. But it is one of the reasons why I bought it. You can see some of the cards on the back if you want to. I have not done a walkthrough of this one yet because these are new. Same with this one. This is the Forest of Enchantment deck. It's very Fey orientated, Fey energy, more like the animalistic spiritual Fey energy rather than fairy in general. But it does have fairy type images on the cards as well. These two I still haven't done a walkthrough on, but I plan to get to them. So, wow, that's a lot, guys. Wow, that's a lot. How did that happen? How did that happen? All right. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed seeing the different kinds of decks that I have. If you have any of the decks, let me know in the comments. Which ones did you like? Which ones haven't you heard of? Which ones have you got yourself, or do you plan on getting, or anything like that? And if you think a deck reads completely different than the way I do, that's okay. It's perfectly fine. You know, to each their own. However you read is what works for you. So use that for yourself, okay? And yeah, so if you're looking for fairy decks, that's what I have so far. I plan to get more as they come. So yeah, and if you know of any decks that are not on here, that I don't have in my collection, feel free to tell me that in the comments as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. I super appreciate it. Be sure to check out the playlist and check out the other ladies' divinations. I'm not sure theirs will be as long as mine. So you guys have a very great day.